Have you ever watched an NBA game and thought to yourself, you know, under the right circumstances, if I maxed out all of my abilities and put all my efforts into this sport, I think I could play in the league. Regardless of how unrealistic this is, I'm sure we've all had this thought before. We all love the game and we'd all love to play it at the highest level. But for 99.9% of us, this dream will forever remain just that, a dream. Because the gap between most of us and an NBA player is massive. In fact, it could be difficult to understand just how much better the average NBA player is compared to the average Joe. Luckily for us, every once in a while an NBA player will take the time to show us just how much better they really are. A few weeks ago, a high school basketball player challenged Brian Scalabrine, former NBA player and basketball GOAT, to a game of one-on-one. The kid was confident, so confident that he even bet his own shoes on the game. Now, this kid looks to be a solid 6'2", 6'3", with some good skill and athleticism, probably better than the average high school hooper. On the other hand, Scalabrine is a 43-year-old who's been retired for nearly a decade. But there's levels to this. So on the first possession, the high schooler tries to create space with a little hezzy pull-up, and gets stuffed. At this point, the game was already over.
Oh, hey! Hey!
He said hit the weight room.
Hey!
They playing for Keith?
Yeah.
After what probably felt like the longest 5 minutes of the kid's life, Brian Scalabrine beat the high schooler 11-0. It wasn't even close. Now, I'm sure there's some clips of the kid getting more shots up on Brian, but his friends decided to only include the clips of Brian torching him. Now, Scal could have easily used his size on every possession, but to really make an example out of the young buck, he got into his bag instead. This isn't even fair. Keep in mind, Brian is a relatively out-of-shape 43-year-old 9 years removed from the NBA. Brian wasn't even an average NBA player. No offense to the man, but when I tried to search up his stats on Basketball Reference, Brian was so low on the leaderboard that he didn't even come up. His name literally doesn't appear. So instead, I had to go over to the ESPN archives and dig through hundreds and hundreds of players until I finally found old Brian on the last page of the league leaderboard. Out of 479 players in the NBA that season, Brian ranked 464th.
One of my favorite American idioms that I actually know is what we call the armchair expert, and I am guilty of being one of these people. Now, for those of you who don't know that expression, an armchair expert is someone who claims to have extensive knowledge on a subject and has no reservations sharing their critique on that said subject, but generally has little to no experience in said subject and or does not contribute to it in any meaningful way whatsoever. So for example, I am an armchair expert in basketball. There are many people like me and Jeff Jamba who think they understand the NBA and are quick to point out the fault of players in the league and how they can improve. But videos like the one we just watched together are a reminder that Jeff and I really don't know everything there is to know about basketball. The athlete you just watched dominating everyone is a man by the name of Brian Scalabrine, who is considered one of the worst NBA players of all time. And yet there are only 540 roster spots in the NBA and 166 million men in the United States, which means this, that Brian may be the worst player in history, but he is also in the way less than 1% of guys who became a professional player. Jeff and I may be convinced we are experts, but we really have no idea what it takes to succeed in the NBA. We are not on Brian Scalabrine's level because there is a huge gap between sitting in the armchair and actually playing the game. Now, whether we like basketball or not, I think something that we may share is the tendency to critique without contributing. What I mean is that it is easy to sit on the sidelines and to sit in the armchair and to think we understand what our communities need, to point out where things are going off track and to tell other people what they should be doing from the comfort of the sidelines, convinced that we have all the answers. We can say, if only there were these programs, if only there were these laws, if only people thought this way and acted this way, that would make an unignorable difference. But here too, there's a huge difference between talking about making a difference and actively making a difference. But the real challenge, the one that God gives us, is to get off the sidelines and to get in the game. That's exactly what God was saying to the people in Jeremiah's day as well. They were exiles, living in a city that wasn't their home, surrounded by people who didn't share their values. It would have been easy for any of them to sit back and say, well, Babylon is a mess, and somebody really should do something about this. And to this, which God replies, exactly, you're that somebody. That's my international version. Now let me give you the NIV where it says this in Jeremiah 29:7. He says, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, guess what? You too will prosper. God didn't want his people to just complain and critique. He was telling them to get involved in Babylon, to make a difference, to invest in the welfare of the place where they were, even if it wasn't the best place to be. And if this was God's instruction for a community that was living under an empire that recently just destroyed their home and forcibly deported everyone, I think it's safe to say God expects the same posture from us today, who by all accounts have it much better. Now, I'm not trying to say there aren't any problems in Pierce County. I know there's plenty. But I'm 99% sure that nobody is here because Bruce Dammeier forced your family to live here and brought you into exile. But even if that were the case, the mission of God's people is to be a blessing wherever they find themselves. And that is why here at Rainier View, one of our core values is to show up for our cities to make an unignorable difference. We are committed to serving our neighbors, partnering with other organizations, and pursuing the common good with those who disagree with us. And we are convinced that God's word is true, that if Pierce County prospers, Rainier View also prospers. This is what Serve Sunday is all about. It is an annual reminder for our Rainier View family to seek the peace and the prosperity of our local community. And one of the reasons why we choose to serve at a local school is because of the reality that most kids will spend, I think, something around the area of 14,000 hours in school before the age of 18. That is 9% of their lives up to that point. And just for comparison, if that same kid had perfect attendance at Rainier View Christian Church, it would only amount to 0.6% of their lives. Whatever our thoughts about schools, the reality is that teachers play a huge role in shaping the next generation. And here at Rainier View, we want to do what we can to support and serve and encourage those teachers. Now, is it true that one day of yard work and teachers' gifts is but a drop in the bucket of the greater needs of our public education system? Well, yeah, absolutely. Serve Sunday is not meant to be a one-time event to address every problem we see. It can't be that. But it is an annual practice to jumpstart our imaginations for and our habit of serving our community. If all we ever do is serve Sunday, but then we fail to show up for our cities throughout the rest of the year, then, well, we have missed the point of Serve Sunday. But also, let's not underestimate what 2 hours out of the year can do for us. When we choose to honor and bless our neighbors, while expecting nothing in return, perhaps that will cause at least one person at that school to get curious. Maybe a teacher might ask, what is it about following Jesus? Why are people doing this? Why are people acting like this? Maybe I should look more into this. And if 2 hours is what it takes for just one person to discover God's love for them, maybe even for the first time, is it worth our time? I think the answer is yes, and perhaps a God who can take 2 loaves and 5 fishes and turn it into a feast will take one day of yard work and gifts and turn it into something beyond what we can hope for or imagine. The point is this, Rainier View. Even if all we do is but a drop in the bucket, God can work with it. It's not about the results, but it's about faithfully showing up. So Rainier View, I want to invite you all to show up today, to make a difference in our community, to be a blessing without expecting a blessing, and to commit ourselves to seeking the common good for our cities, so that Jesus might be seen and known through all that we do.